In another unpacking, I thought I'd have a look at what came in from Navwar a few weeks ago. I did actually open the envelope, and I'd ordered 3 parcels of ships. One is the modern warfare, the World War One Russian fleet pack. The second is the modern Soviet fleet pack, 1/3000 scale ships. And the third was a loose collection of ships for the Dutch in World War II. So here, for example, we have pretty much the entire Dutch East Indies fleet, plus a few vessels from the European waters fleet. Within this Dutch fleet, there are a number of destroyers. We've got here the Isaac Sweers class ship. There was one destroyer in service with the Dutch, and a second was taken over by the Germans and was in service with the Germans. We've also got the De Witt class. There's 6 vessels in that group, and 8 vessels in that group. Also purchased were the Tromp and Heemskerk Dutch light cruisers. Tromp, of course, having sailed in the East Indies. Dutch cruiser, the Java, which was one of the participants in the Battle of the Java Sea. The Java also had a sister ship, the Sumatra, which the second vessel's for, and of course one of the more famous Dutch vessels, the De Ruyter. I've already opened this one, so let's just have a quick peek at the actual vessel itself. As I said, this is a 1/3000 scale ship. It's a light cruiser, and De Ruyter was present at the Battle of the Java Sea. It was also sunk, along with a number of Australian ships and British vessels in the East Indies at the start of the Second World War. So while the detail on the Navwar 1/3000 scale vessels isn't as great as on GHQ's vessels, the scale's a little bit smaller at 1/3000th. The GHQ vessels, which are, to be honest, works of art, are at 1/2400th. But you can still see the details. Here they've got the main armament. You can see some of the secondary guns, the life boats, the Admiral's boat and so on. There's one of the seaplanes that was, or the seaplane that was carried. These weren't launched off catapult, but were actually put in the water and then took off from the water. The weaponry on these vessels was about 4.1 inch guns, I think. No, it's a cruiser, 6 inch guns, plus or minus, and then they had 3 inch anti-aircraft guns backing it up, and 40mm guns as well. So it's a nice vessel. I might paint that up as just as a test piece in the not too distant future. Next up, we'll have a look at the Russian World War One fleet. Okay, in the Dutch World War One fleet pack, in the Russian World War One fleet pack, there's the usual insert, basically listing each of the World War One fleet packs that, or starter packs rather, that Navwar have available. And if we look around over here, we can see the Russians right down the bottom. So the pack contains, let's see if I can get this to focus. Right, there we go. One of the projected battle cruisers, which I don't think was ever actually built. 5 12-inch gunned battleships, a couple of protected cruisers, or 4 protected cruisers, and 8 destroyers, 4 of the Novik class and 4 of the Ukrainia class. So this is just a start to get moving with a World War I Russian fleet. Some of these vessels would have been used in the Black Sea, some in the Baltic, and perhaps a few in the Asian station. Okay, quick look at the vessels. Again, that's little Navwar packets. They come in this easy to see pink. These are also 1/3000th scale. So here's the protected cruisers. As you can see, these little guys are just over an inch, about an inch and a quarter, inch and a half long. And they look like they wouldn't be out of place in the Japanese-Russian, or the Russo-Japanese War of 1904-5. Here we have the Admiral Nakimov, the light cruisers, World War I light cruisers, which are big chunky things. These are newer molds from Navwar, so they're a little bit cleaner than some of the older stuff. The Gangut, this is the proposed vessel and part of the Baltic fleet. Sorry, the Gangut was from the Baltic fleet, not proposed. The Borodino was the proposed battle cruiser. So it was launched in 1915, but it was never actually finished in time for the war. The Russian Revolution overtook everything. So we've got the dreadnought from the Black Sea fleet, the Imperatrice Maria. Pardon my good Russian accent. Imperatrice Maria. Okay. What's that? The Empress Maria, I think, if you translate that to English. It's a very older style dreadnought. We've got here some destroyers. The Russian destroyers have these sort of large masts fore and aft. Now the standard destroyers. The more usual ones, the torpedo boat destroyers, or TBDs as they were very small vessels. So we've got a number of those. We've had a look at that. The Maria we've already looked at, and the Imperator Nikolai the First, one of the dreadnoughts. Okay, so that's what comes in the Russian World War I fleet, or starter pack. So it's the start of a reasonable fleet. And if I added to it, the first edition would be more destroyers and cruisers, of course. And then mainly because the Russians didn't have that many battleships left after the Battle of Tsushima. Next off, we'll have a look at the modern Russian fleet. Okay, the modern Russian fleet. The modern warships have a yellow packet or cover, just to make it easier, I guess, at Navwar to see them apart, get that out of the way. And like the World War I starter, within each of the fleet packs for the modern fleets, we have an insert which again tells us what's in each of the packs. So in the Soviet Union pack, so this is predating Glasnost. Let's see if we can get this clearer. There we go. So we've got 6 submarines, 3 nuclear missile submarines and 3 attack submarines, a couple of aircraft carriers, the Admiral Kuznetsov and the Kiev, some guided missile cruisers of the Slava class, some guided missile destroyers of the Udaloy and the Sovremy class, and some anti-submarine corvettes of the Pork class, some guided missile corvettes of the Taranul class, and a fleet replenishment ship for the Boris Chilkin class. If you looked at getting, say, the British or the fleet from Great Britain to provide an opponent for the Soviets, then within that you'd get, again, 3 attack submarines, 3 ballistic submarines, a couple of helicopter carriers or Harrier carriers, 4 guided missile destroyers, 4 guided missile frigates, or 6 guided missile frigates actually, 8 guided missile frigates, and a fleet replenishment ship. And they're the various classes. In the collection here, I already have the Indian fleet pack, the Chinese fleet pack, and the Japanese fleet pack. So after the Russians, or the Soviets, I'm thinking of adding a French fleet pack. They, apart from being really good looking vessels, they have a presence around Southeast Asia. And then just for something different, maybe the Italians, the USA and Great Britain. Okay, the carrier. There's the Admiral I always have trouble saying this name. The Admiral, let's try that again. The Kiev class aircraft carrier, a Russian aircraft carrier. It's also a missile base as well as carrying aircraft and helicopters. Actually, the other one will turn up when we turn it up. The nuclear ballistic submarines. These are very big buggers, as you can see. I'll show you some smaller submarines later. Here's the other carrier. The Admiral Kuznetsov. It's one of the bigger models from Navwar and actually comes with a separate island. So it'll be another chance for me to stick my fingers together with super glue one more time before painting. The Soviet replenishment oiler, and again I've got lots of bits to add on to that, so some more super gluing coming up when I get around to them. Here's the missile corvettes. They're very small little fellas, but they're armed well. No helicopters on those, as I understand. The anti-submarine corvettes, again, to be used to provide protection for the carriers. The guided missile destroyer, the Udaloy class, so has a good modern look to it, and it's about 1.5 inches long as far as the model goes. The Slava class guided missile destroyer, again you can see the banks of missiles down, well they're down both sides, but you can see them on one side, so that's what's that, eight bins there, so 16 bins of missiles. The little cheat sheets that come explaining the vessel also give you, I really must get something to hold this camera with that stops me or frees up my other hand. So you usually get details of the armament. So there's 8 twin lots of SSN 12 SSMs, surface-to-surface missiles. You've got the anti-aircraft, surface-to-air missiles. Of course, these vessels also carry helicopters. That'll be the Ki-25 Hormone. We've looked at the Udaloy, and we've looked at the Sovremi. Actually, we haven't. That's the Sovremi guided missile destroyer. And these are the Russian attack submarines. So they're somewhat smaller than the nuclear ones. These were designed for attacking warships and other submarines, whereas the big nuclear submarines are designed for staying at sea for a long time, getting lost, and attacking land targets in that mutually assured destruction scenarios of the Cold War or MAD. Okay, 2 other little things to show just before I finish this. So back in a second. I mentioned that I had the Russians, or the Soviets rather, as an opponent for some of my other modern fleets. I thought I'd show some vessels that I've already painted up just to give you an idea. Something that's been reasonably topical in this part of Asia recently has been the Chinese aircraft carriers. So this is the Navwar model of the Liaoning, the current active carrier that the Chinese are Yeah, get it in focus, that the Chinese are working up carrier operations on. That was an interesting one to paint. Since I've done this model, I've actually changed my basing techniques. At this point, I used to just paint a flat sea surface and add vessel wakes on, but when we get to the Japanese, I'll show you what I'm currently doing. So that's the Navwar model for her. Here's a Chinese fleet oiler, number 882, a replenishment ship, with helicopter on the landing pad out the back. So there's some interesting vessels in that fleet. We've got here Zheng, which is one of the larger attack submarines, and this is the smaller submarine class, number 307. As you can see, I said I was painting the sea bases rather than texturing them or anything at this stage. The first of the modern naval stuff I did was an Indian naval force, and again, this is one of the Indian submarines, and again the painted base. This was when I was first, I guess, practicing my painting technique with modern warships, so these ones are perhaps not the best. The old carrier, the Vikrant, I really should redo the name tag on that. As you can see, that's a much rougher paint job than on the Chinese carrier. Still gives an idea of what's happening about it though. I learned a trick when doing this, which was don't use paint and brush to paint the deck on these vessels. Use pens. When you use paint and brush, it gets a bit thick like this, and it's always hard to get a straight line or a circle. Much easier to use very fine tipped pens to do that. Let's get some of the regular vessels. So the INS Godavari, it's one of their missile corvettes, or frigates rather. I think the difference between a frigate and a destroyer is only a few thousand tons still, a few hundred tons maybe. These days there's very little difference, much less than in the Second World War. Patrol vessel, the Suvani, and again the Indian vessels tended to be a darker grey than the Chinese. Leastways that's the way it looked from what I can remember at a Navy Open Day at Changi Naval Base in Singapore, where there was a number of Indian ships in, and I managed to get photographs of them. This is the Ranjit, so you can see they paint up quite well. If you use the right sort of technique on the vessels, you tend to see the detail. Some of the things that I will shortcut on, where I'm dealing with lifeboats, Kali rafts, that sort of thing, I tend to paint them white or an offsetting colour, even though in wartime they'd be overpainted in grey, just to make them easier to see. That's the Chinese vessel, the Guilin, which is, and the Chinese characters for it too, actually. So, yeah, again, the Chinese are nice vessels to paint, and the level of detail on the Navwar vessels, as I said, while it's not as great as it is on, say, GHQ, from wargaming distance, which is about here, you know, they look the part. And I like to use a thick base underneath because it makes it easier to handle. Come on, focus. There you go. Makes it easy to handle the vessels. It also gives me somewhere to put the name on it, so you don't forget what you're dealing with in the middle of a game. Okay, last lot, my Japanese. And here I used a new for me anyway, but a different technique for basing. So on the sea base I put first some woodland scenics, scenic gunk, basically. Just put a thin layer of it on, and then tap with your finger to bring up an irregular pattern, like waves or swell, If you do it a few times, you can actually, you can actually get, where are we? See if I can find one that's easy to see. But you can actually get like rows of waves coming across the base. Maybe it's a bit clearer on the submarines. Here you can almost see a swell that the sub's running into, and I'll be doing all the future bases like that because it just looks so much better than the simple painted one. What I will do next time though is do the same thing I've done with the painted ones and use a green phosphorus colour, goblin green in Citadel colours, wash very thinly across it to add a slight green tint to the seawater. So this is the Haruna with its flight deck at the back for, I think it carries 2 helicopters. And again, they're tidy looking vessels. So I've got this nice little, come back to the carrier. The Japanese don't have carriers, aircraft carriers. This is a helicopter carrier with a slightly raised foredeck. So the length of the thing and the slightly raised foredeck, even if there is a lift there, an elevator, could probably be used for VTOL type aircraft to take off from. I believe the Japanese are actually considering a larger helicopter carrier as well. So that then is my modern fleets, and these will provide the opposition, or some of the opposition for the Soviets. Tucked away in another box, I've also got aircraft for this. I'm still preparing those, that is, putting them on flight stands, bases and what have you. So when I've got those finished, I'll actually maybe do a fleet review at one point and get all vessels on each fleet out, photograph them, and carry on to the next fleet. There's only one other thing I wanted to show before closing up tonight, and that's what's on Thomo's workbench. He says, sliding over to computer table, adding some light. Might not have been the smartest thing, but I've still got my T3485s prepped and ready for painting. I'm just trying to finish getting sand on the Polish infantry bases so that when I undercoat, I can undercoat everything at the same time. But I do have some neat air for the poles. Here's my mill. I've managed to get my mill 24. I've managed to get a magnet underneath it, and if I guess the spot right, so now it sits on a magnetic pole, and it has that sort of nice, aggressive, slightly nose down aspect that we've come to expect from the mill 24s. Okay, so that's everything that's basically happening in Thomo's hole at the moment. I was planning on doing some painting tonight, but watching old episodes of Hornblower got in the way, so tomorrow night won't be a painting night either. I think someone suggested beer might be in order, so the first chance I get to do some painting will be Wednesday night. And I think rather than finish the sand, I might actually start the bases on these T34s and get them rolling. Otherwise, I'll never get back into a mode for painting. So that will be the painting targets for Wednesday and Thursday night this week. Okay, thanks for listening. Any comments, of course, leave them down the bottom. This is the apartment, by the way. So as you can see, it's not exactly a big one here in Manila, but it's got pretty much everything I need at the moment. Not to mention some additional bookshelf space and what have you. Okay, talk to you all again soon. Good night.